practice that deals with a lot of performing artists, most of which happen to be dancers. So today we're presenting on useful verbal cues for activating your core, and we'll be discussing some of the evidence surrounding this as well. That's all right, I'll just use the mouse to click, that's fine. So before we start to delve into the verbal cues we use to activate the core, we need to understand what the core actually is. So it is made up of a few different muscle groups. There's the transversus abdominis muscle, which is the innermost layer of the abdominal muscles. There's the multifidus muscle, which is the innermost layer of the back muscles. The multifidus, the muscle bellies are very short muscles, and they run between the vertebrae and the spine, which are the spinal bones. And the final muscle in the group of the core is the pelvic floor muscle group, and that's a sling of muscles that's at the base of the pelvis. And one of the primary roles of this muscle is to support the organs of the pelvis. The core in today's society tends to get thrown around by a lot of people, personal trainers, just colloquially as well. And a lot of people in lay terms understand it to be those superficial global muscles of the trunk. So things including the six-pack or the rectus abdominal muscles and the two oblique muscles. So it's important to differentiate that the core that we're speaking about today isn't those bigger muscles. Oh, sorry. So a lot of the research surrounding the core, especially in the physiotherapy industry, tends to talk about the transversus abdominis muscle. It's one of the most easily accessible muscles to do research on. So for today, we're going to be focusing particularly on recruitment of transversus. So it's important to understand its specific role, and it's got a number of functions. The ones most relevant to us today are the ability of this muscle to control the movement of the spine, controlling also the lumbopelvic section, which is really important in maintaining posture. We all know how important posture is to dancers. And this muscle also plays a role in sacroiliac joint stability and control. And this joint is one of the joints in the pelvis, of the lower part of the pelvis. So trunk control specifically in dancers is very important. It's essential to elicit those fluid movements we see and we know that dance to be. It gives the dancer the ability to create various shapes with their body as well. And dance is a very repeatable pattern to this sport and the activity. Good trunk control allows for efficient and repeatable movement patterns. And this gives you a very efficient dancer, one that's less likely to be injured if they've got that control over their movement. It's particularly good for sustainable choreography in a performance setting, but also in a rehearsal and a classroom setting as well. A lot of the research around the core involves looking at people who have lower back pain and its role in preventing and rehabbing lower back pain. So we need to discuss this as well. Lower back pain leads to the reorganisation of the motor cortex. So the motor cortex is the section of the brain where the body receives input and sends output to how we move and how we function. When there's lower back pain, it leads to postural control deficits. And we see this as a pattern of bracing and stiffening in the trunk, which we heard about this morning with that particular case study with Sally. Part of the reason why this happens is there's significantly less transversus abdominis activation in the presence of lower back pain. And part of the reason why this happens is there's a reflex inhibition of that muscle from the pain and the interpretation of pain in that area of the lung spine. And when all of this happens, we see an increased activity of the global muscles that I mentioned earlier. So those obliques and the rectus abdominis, or six-pack. And then that in turn leads into that stiffness, and we can end up in a cycle of things, and then that leads on to chronic pain and a whole other discussion. Those global muscles take on that stability role that the transversus abdominis and the other core muscles have. So in the absence of those muscles, we do end up in a bit of a cycle there. So the first little bit of evidence we're going to be talking about, and at this point I think it's important to acknowledge all the researchers that have done all this. So Urquhart did a study in 2005, and they took 7 participants. They weren't dancers, they were just your average humans. None of these people had a history of lower back pain, so it's quite a small study. There are very few studies out there that actually talk about how we cue these muscles. This is one of the better ones, I think, as well. They set the person up in a supine position or crook-lie position. So the person was lying on their back with their knees bent up and their feet on the ground. They put EMG needles into all the different abdominal muscles to assess the recruitment and how they functioned. And the way, the cue they gave a few different verbal cues instructing the person how they wanted to use their muscles.